And I think it's all this is a huge misunderstanding, because my talk is not about sentiment analysis even, let alone emotion stuff. I do have 2 slides on emotions, but that's about it. So of course you realize that with a title like this, I sort of had to do this. And so this is what we're going to do. And if you're worried about pronouncing Agata's last names, well, if you can pronounce Iga Świątek, then you can pronounce Agata Kwaśnicka-Janowicz. Now, we're doing this as part of a big project that we run together within the Jagiellonian Center for Digital Humanities. Now you know what it's like in Polish, that we also run together. And so what this is about, well, it first starts with, this is saying minor literatures. And this is the elephant in the room, because obviously there are minor literatures, but it sort of looks like most literatures in the world now are a minor literature. And you know what proves me right? You all recognize it, Shakespeare. If I had put Adam Mickiewicz or, I don't know, Piotr Kochanowski or Pierre de Ronsard, even, I don't think you would have recognized it immediately. So, and also you will see how this is going, and you see why we're all together here. We first have German literature, then Chinese literature, it's Polish literature. So there we are. This is not all, and this is not at all new. This is a very politely imperialistic ending to a 12-volume work on periods of European literature by Professor George Sainsbury of the University of Cambridge many, many years ago. You can read this yourselves, because I'll probably start crying. The problem with those minor literatures, I mean, we recognize Shakespeare, but then in those other literatures, it doesn't really work that way. But perhaps there is a way to read such an inverted commas minor literature. This is how can anyone read Polish literature. When we apply Franco Moretti's distant reading, which is a way to get beyond the canon, the global canon being pretty much the English language one, and actually his disciple, Matt Joker, states it, as you can see, even in a more provocative way. Distant reading is a way to ask questions to works of literature where there's really a lot of one. When there's more than we can read, because obviously there are more works of literature in national literature that we can read. Of course, distant reading has its critics. Joanna Bricker, for instance, says that computers do not interpret, they simply find patterns. I say not simply, and I like patterns, but you have to admire the beautifully witty title of her essay. I mean, come on, distant reading is why distant reading isn't. Now, Laura Mandel, who's around somewhere here, is more specific. She's worried about distant reading addressing and perhaps reinforcing stereotypes such as male and female. My answer to this is that stereotypes are patterns of observation with unchecked, probably low statistical significance. It might actually help us if we dirty our hands and check that statistical significance. Perhaps some of them are not stereotypes, and better, if they're not true, we can abolish them and move on. So now, what I'm going to show you is how we're building at my university a biggish corpus of writing in Polish. The reasons for that are listed here, as you can see. What is interesting, among others, to me, who started off in translation studies, we are not going in the usual way of creating a national corpus, if that's not national. Mostly only originals are included. Now, since the cultural turn in translation studies, and also in a way since Lawrence Venuti's criticism of the invisibility of the translator, it actually makes sense to introduce translations as well. So this is what we're doing, and there's all kinds of sources from which we can get some stuff. And the first two are very good. Polish wiki sources, I pray for them every day. And the last one is now I'm mentioning the Polish National Corpus, which is based on a smaller amount of text, but of course it's a totally different thing. It's a hierarchical kind of a real linguistic corpus for the study of language, but still I want to show off that we have more texts than anybody else. This is the money, we're getting the money from our university's flagship project. Yes, there's a university in Poland that actually treats digital humanities as a flagship thing to do. We'll see for how long. And I have to acknowledge the first lockdown, which was very conducive to sitting at home and getting those texts into the computer. So these are the numbers. At this time, we have a little above 10,000 full text, sort of novel-sized texts, whether they're collections of poetry or written poems or drama, and it's growing. It's growing. In terms of tokens, we have 500 million. So there's not big data, biggish data. And in terms of authors, we have around more or less the same number of authors and translators. Actually, it's interesting that more than 100 of those authors are also translators, or vice versa. And we have a very uneven, unbalanced composition of the source languages, which are in fact 24 with Polish. But of course, the whole text corpus is in Polish. Now, before I start patting myself with pride that I have so many books, look at this. These are publishing data for literature translated in original in Poland for the, in the recent past. And you can see that in about like 4 years, we get more than 10,000 texts. So you can see what we have is then the Polish publishing market runs away from us. On yet another hand, if we would like to read this, in a traditional way, that would be the time. So you see the problem. We need distant reading because no human can actually work with that. Now, building this corpus, obviously, the biggest problem is that we're dealing with a whole number of biases, filters, and from what was written or translated, and some, as you can see, some of them are objective, some of them are subjective. What was digitized, I mean, obviously first, what every national electronic literature digitizes is the canon. Now, of course, at 10,000, we're way beyond the canon. But then all other problems come in, and now I'm talking about the problems. So bear with me. So first of all, this is the composition over first publication date, and you see what we see here. Of course, the really big numbers started at the end of the 18th century. You can see the rising disproportion between original texts and translations. I don't think this is a Polish phenomenon. Poland is very open. I think it perhaps is one of the most sort of open countries to grabbing other people's books and translating them into the language. I know, I translated 30 novels myself. And if we look at the proportions, this actually gets really funny. Look how the 19th century is dominated by original Polish writing in terms of first editions. And then we have like 3 moments when translation rises sharply. And you know what? when you look at that from the point of view of Polish history, this is the next decade after Poland's regaining independence after World War I, and Poles start translating more foreign novels. This is after the death of hardcore Stalinism, when it sort of evolves into a dying and more or less decadent real socialism, as it was euphemistically called. And this, of course, comes a decade later after what for many people was actually the end of World War II in Poland and the regaining of independence from the Soviet bloc. So it looks like there's a rule. If things start going well in Poland, the Poles go and translate foreign literature more. Now, speaking of dominating literature, look at the dark blue English. These are the proportions again. Now, the interesting thing here is previous Polish studies from about half a century ago pointed to just the 1920s as the real emergence of English literature as the dominating translated literature in Poland. Not true in our corpus, if it's at all represented. See, I mean, the blue appears really early, and there's Dickens and there's Byron, and actually we'll have more Byron. These are, of course, those terribly scary Scandinavian crime stories. You know, very popular in Poland now. And here comes the usual problem, the gender imbalance in the data. And of course, I mean, it's not, as you can see, first of all, optimistically, it's becoming more and more balanced. And even sort of when you look from in a micro perspective, it's also true. Our first three Nobel Prize winners were men, but the two last Nobel Prize winners are women. Szymborska and Tokarczuk. So it looks like there's a trend. But when we look at text by author, sex by in translation, then it's even worse. And there's a possible double diagnosis. Perhaps we're dealing with a double bias. Women are the double bias of women translated from a literature where they were also biased against. This is not good English, but I think you know what I mean. There is also something that we observed when we were doing our LTEC corpus. The Polish literature was actually pretty feminized by comparison with other literatures. Hence, the foreign literature is different. Now, in terms of translation, it's very different. You can see that recently this is now a completely female-dominated profession. And again, I happened to read on the plane the shortlist for the International Booker Prize, and of the Polish translations, a huge majority of those authors who've been shortlisted are women. So obviously we can talk about the sort of translators' invisibility too, but there might be actually many more women earlier on who are listed as anonymous, and we'll be looking into that further. Now, you might have noticed I used sex because we don't really know about gender and historical data. If you want to talk about gender, here's gender in translation. There's 4. As you might notice, thank you. And you might notice that what's really important here is that women translate men more often than men translate women, which I also see in my own translatorial work. So finally, here's my one sentiment analysis based on a not very robust a large language model pre-trained, among other things, on literary data. That's rare. And so here let's compare how the results here are for positivity in texts. And let me explain Polish history to you. So Poland loses its independence somewhere here. it has a number of rebellions that end badly. Here comes the last one. And then Poles switch to a sort of less direct violent action, more social and educational betterment and economic betterment. And up it goes, and this is exactly where they regain their independence after World War I. And you know what this rising part of Polish literary history has always been called before my excellent study? For totally different reasons, of course. It's positivism. So suddenly, it's the sort of the same trend that was called positive Auerbach in Germany. So it's that kind of positivism. But apparently, yeah. So just very quickly, because I'm running out of time, and God for you. Let's not forget we're dealing with a full text corpus. So we're going to apply the usual EDER method of cluster analysis of most frequent word frequencies. And Maciej is the guy in the black mask sitting there. See, he's waving at you now. And this gives us a beautiful network. Now, I think it looks like Russia. Agata thinks it looks like the United States, but oh my God, it's red and blue. What have we done? And not the interesting thing for me, the former translator, is look how the red and the blue sort of, they're not mixed equally. There are patches of blue and there's patches of red. So let's take a look at the patches of blue and the packets. Now everything which is not originally Polish has been blacked out, grayed out. Don't see the gray. And there's sort of a progression. This is the part Agata is interested in as a historian of language. Now, when we look at the translations, they also tend to stick in sort of translations from the English with English. I mean, of course, it's horribly chaotic, but this is what we get. And it sort of shows us that not only do we have translationese, which is a different way a language is used, whether it's in original and translation, that's a very big discussion in translation studies, but also translationese is sort of depends on the source language, and that's a very inspiring thing. I'm going to go to the conclusions now, and let's see at this new hope. It's sort of, I mean, we've been using distance reading with stylometry together, so a telescope and a microscope at the same time, and I think I like what I see here because we see patterns that we can recognize from traditional literary history. Then if something does not fit, perhaps we should read those books again. You know, like you get a bad urine test, and and your doctor has to look at you. And of course, the translation is thing. And of course, the main hope is that perhaps if we apply distant reading in a comparative literary situation, perhaps we can compare. I mean, I would love to see if translations into other languages behave like the ones in Polish, and etc. So yay. And in a way, of course. Okay, I hope my Polish colleagues won't be yelling at me too much for this. No, so finally, there's many other things that we're planning to do with the corpus until we start running out of money. So of course, we're going to expand metadata. We are already preparing an online repository of the full text versions. Whenever they're from the public domain, of course, we'll only be allowing frequencies of various things. We're thinking of getting parallel text in source languages. That's going to cost us. We already have an API that uses the European Union Machine Translation Service to machine translate any number of texts. And we also are trying to corroborate the various translation observations with a sub-project of our main project to corroborate some of the findings that we have here at metadata we have from various public libraries. And I guess that's it.